Joining me on the show today is Marlys Brodsky. Marlys family immigrated to the United States from Panama when she was just 1 year old. Her story includes everything from homelessness to a brain tumor. Marlys' story sheds light on what it's like when you're too afraid to die, but equally afraid to live. Today, she is a trailblazer in the healthcare and public safety arenas. Her story shows us how the power of faith can help you overcome life's toughest moments. I am so honored to have Marlys Brodsky here with me on the show today. Marlys, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You have quite an incredible story. And when it was sent to me, I was just in tears reading through all of it. And so I know that our listeners are going to get so much from your story. Um, I'm both excited. Feels like the wrong word to use to be like, I'm so excited to tell Marlys' story because, as our listeners will see, you've had a really, really hard life. But the good news is there's beauty from it. So let's just start at the beginning and start with your family immigrated here to the United States. So let's just start there.
Yeah, so like you said, Marlys Brodsky here. I was born in Panama, so I come from both of my parents being Panamanian as well. They were both born and raised there, and I was born there too. Um, my dad at the time was a fisherman, so he used to do tuna fishing, and as a result of that, he ended up in a really bad accident that basically tore his entire right arm and required surgery. So he was flown to the States where he was able to receive the treatment that he wanted. And as a result, in order for him to have all of the reconstructive surgeries and support that was going to be needed, um, they were able to accommodate for my mom to relocate to the States and be able to live here while he was undergoing treatment with a visa. And that is how I came to the States when I was about a year old.
Okay. So your family comes, you got here by way of a devastating accident happening to your father. Do you guys decide to stay in the States? And then what does life look like from there about getting housing or work? Or take me through kind of like those phase, that part of the life after he's recovered.
Right. So I was a baby. My parents did not speak English at all at the time. So that in and of itself is already a limitation. We
Mhm.
were pretty limited by the language barrier. My parents did not have a lot of money. Obviously, my dad was recovering in and out of surgeries. My mom was here alone. His lawyer was probably the biggest support at the time. And they lived in a really tiny apartment where I grew up for the first couple of years. And then, of course, that's also where my brother was born as well. So I do have three other siblings. And over time, just basically having that mentality of the American dream, right?
Mhm.
My dad was like, well, I got to work. I got to figure something out. I can't go back. I am disabled. I can't go back and work like I used to in the fishing boats. So he decides to start his own landscape company.
Mm.
So I grew up in an apartment and basically got to see my dad start his landscape. And it was not this like prestigious thing. It was just, hey, I went and got a mower. I'm going to teach myself how to mow lawns and I'm going to go mow lawns. And that was just kind of what happened. And growing up during the summers, instead of doing all the fun things that kids were doing, guess what? I was mowing lawns with my dad and I was pulling out weeds and I was just sitting in a truck for the hot summer days. And I got to see his work ethic. I got to
Mm.
see what surviving in the States was like. And I always told myself that I wanted to do better, that I wanted to carry on that work ethic and do something for myself. Now, with my parents not going to college and not having that type of education, I didn't even know what college was.
Yeah.
I just knew that I had to do good
Yeah.
and I had to get the grades because that's what everybody says you have to do. So um, that was kind of where we were. We had a lot of ups and downs. Obviously, as a minority, you're not always treated fairly.
Mhm.
Um, he there were times that because he was a minority, he didn't speak the language, he would do work and not get paid. And there's not much that he could do.
Yeah.
So as a result of that, we never really had a steady home. We bounced around from house to house until eventually, due to another one of his accidents, we became homeless.
Mm. How old were you when that happened?
I was 12 years old when we were officially homeless.
Now, when you say homeless, like you guys are living in a car, living on the streets, where were you guys staying?
Wherever the night would find us.
Mm.
So at that time, I got to witness the sheriff come take us out of our home. Our home.
Yeah.
We had a car. My mom was pregnant at the time with
Yeah.
my youngest brother, and we had nothing. We literally just, oh man, I have never told this story before. Um, we sat on a sidewalk. It was really late at night, and I just remember like thinking my life is over,
Mm.
but we have to keep going, right? We have to figure out how to make this work. We have a little baby on the way. And I just remember, like, even in that lowest point, my dad just basically saying, like, don't worry, you know, if there is a God, and I know there is, he won't let us down. He
Mm.
won't let us stay here.
Yeah.
And we spent several years like bouncing around. We spent a lot of time living in a car. Um, like I said, my mom was pregnant. My dad spent a lot of time trying to find work, trying to do whatever it took, whether it was construction, whether it was landscape, whether it was
Mhm.
like mowing someone's lawn for the day. But of course, he was injured from a really severe accident where he was told he would never walk again.
Oh,
He is
God.
walking by the grace of God. But it was hard. And there were times where my dad would come home. He's like, I got $5. And we would drive to Jack in the Box and get from the dollar menu, maybe like
Mhm.
some tacos. Like, man,
Mhm.
Jack in the Box tacos are still some of my favorite ones.
Mm.
They bring a lot of memories from just being in that point in my life. And there were times where he'd come and he'd only have a banana. And we'd be like, you know what, mom, you're pregnant. Just eat it.
Yeah.
Like, we will be fine. We will figure it out. So we used to sleep in a car. We used to, if it was on a good day, we would probably stay in a hotel for the night.
Mhm.
And sometimes we'd sleep on like campgrounds and campsites and parks, still in
Yeah.
the car. Um, so it was hard. And in this whole process, like nobody knew what we were going through, right? I think one of the stigmas of Latin culture is people don't need to know your life. People don't need
Mhm.
to know what you're going through. It's
Mhm.
okay. Just put up a strong face. Everything's going to be fine. And that's exactly what we did. My siblings and I went to school sometimes on 2, 3 days of not eating a single thing of food, but we had to show up. We had to go to school. And of course, we didn't want to be taken from our parents. So we're like,
Right.
got to
Right.
pretend that everything's good.
Yeah.
And sometimes, we had amazing friends who would notice that we didn't bring lunch to school or we didn't bring things, and they would buy us lunch. And I would go and find my brother, and we'd share something and save some for later for the rest of our family.
Yeah.
So it was a very, very difficult time, and as you can imagine, a very depressing time,
Yeah.
especially as a teenager, um,
Yeah.
going through something like that.
Yeah.
And
I mean, if you were 12 when that happened, my daughter is 15.
mhm,
And, and as you said, this went on for a while.
yeah,
And I can't imagine all the challenges in general that just come with being a teenager.
yeah,
And then you add to that that your family is homeless and sometimes not eating. You're immigrants that where your dad is struggling to find work and
mhm,
take care of the family. Um, that feels like a really, really hard thing for an adult. I mean, that'd be hard for any adult, but as a teenager, what do you feel like you just didn't know any other way, so it wasn't as big of a deal, or was it a really big deal but you just were really good at hiding it? Like, I'm interested because I feel like, did you know how bad it was at that time? Were you very aware of it?
Yes, I was very aware of how bad it was. I think for my brother and I being the oldest,
Yeah.
I am the oldest of four, and then it's my brother. For us being the oldest and um, seeing everything that we were going through and then having to still go through this while we were in high school was
Yeah.
really difficult. It was very difficult to show up and see, everybody else doing so well, and it sometimes was also like frustrating to see other students who had it easier like
Mhm.
take some of those things for granted.
Yeah.
But I think we got so good at like hiding it and putting up like a a face
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
just like, pretending like life was good,
Mhm.
that oftentimes people were like, oh, well, like even when we try to say something, I think people were just like, okay, whatever, rich kid, like go sit over
Mhm.
there. Like, that's not true. Like, you're fine. But I
Mm.
think it was because we were just it was so drilled in us. Like, you don't share what's going on. You
Right.
don't want to get pulled from your family. You don't
Right.
say this. You don't say that. It was like we had all these lists of like don'ts that I think that we were able to create almost like a fake life.
Mm.
Just saying like, oh yeah, no, things are good. Things are good. Yeah, no, my dad works. He has a construction company, we're good.
All these things are
And it
going
was
on around you and nobody knows.
nobody. I think, like I said, this is probably the first time I share this story. I have very close friends that now like they know what I was going through at that time, that they were like, no, there's no way. Like, no, you never showed any signs of this or any signs
Right.
of that. But, it was just like we got so good at just
Yeah.
pretending, pretending that life
Where
was.
were where were you guys living at that time? What state?
We were in California. So
Okay.
when my dad came to the States, he was in San Diego, California.
Mhm.
We used to live in Chula Vista. And then when we became homeless, we moved to Oceanside, California. It
Okay.
was a little bit cheaper. We thought it was probably easier to find our way back
Yeah.
there. And obviously it was not. We had some good times, some bad times, and it just seemed like we were going to constantly be in this cycle of we have money today, we don't have money tomorrow, we're going to eat today, we won't eat tomorrow. And it was just almost like when you have nothing, the only thing that you have is hope,
Mm.
and you have each other, and you have God.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we learned to rely on those three things because we had nothing else.
When you're in high school and you're going through this, again, I have a senior right now and a almost 16-year-old, and they're thinking about their future, right? What do they want to do with their life? Where do they want to go to school? Or do they want to go to school, college, and like what was life like for you at when you're in high school
Mhm.
and you're going through something that only a fraction of people in their life will ever experience, and you're up against all these odds? Like, are you hopeful? Are you hopeful at that time and thinking about your future and what are the possibilities, or do you feel stuck? Like, tell me about like what that time was like for you in high school and what
Yeah.
you thought your future would be.
So it was interesting. Like, I knew that I wanted a future. I knew that whatever future I wanted, I did not want it to be this in that
Yeah.
moment. And I just knew that I had to get good grades, but I didn't know why. I just
Mhm.
had to, because that's what my parents kept telling me, like, you have to get good grades to succeed. You have to do this. But it never made sense, right? Like, the idea of college was just not something that I ever thought about.
Yeah.
And I actually have a very funny story about my future. And that is that when I was going through all these things in high school, and despite all of the barriers and challenges and the living circumstances that we were in, my brother and I were still straight A students. We maintained a really high grade point average. My brother ended up with a 5.0. He
Wow.
was nominated to be a valedictorian, which he turned down because he didn't want to give a speech.
Wow.
Um, and we still had the grades, right? So I had the grades. I don't know what I was going to do with those grades, but I had the grades. And I remember that all of my friends had signed up for this class in high school called AVID, which basically helps students go to college.
Mhm.
And because I didn't sign up, I had this like free period where I would just like come and hang out outside the classroom and, just wait for my friends. And I remember one time, like the teacher coming out and she was like, "You don't have a class this period?" And I was like, "No." And she's like, "Oh, that's interesting. Well, are you going to go to college?" And I was like, "No, I'm too poor. I can't afford it."
Mm.
And she's like, "Okay, but that's not a reason to not go to college. Like, what do you want to do with your future?" And I said, "Oh, I want to be a doctor." And she's like, "But you're not going to
Wow.
college." And I said, "No." And she looks at me again, like confused. She wasn't
Right.
sure if I was serious. And
Right.
she's like, "So when you graduate high school and you go become a doctor, like, how are you going to do that?" And I looked at her very seriously, like this was my plan. And I said, "Well, I'm going to go to the hospital and I'm just going to apply. Like, I'm going to fill out an application and then they're going to train me and then I'm going to be a doctor." Like, that
Wow.
was legitimately my plan for my future.
Yeah.
And till this day, I don't know how she did not laugh in my face at that moment. And I just remember she hugged me and she was like, "Sweetheart, you need to get in my class. Like, you
Mm.
need to get into this class." And she's like, "If there's one thing I can promise you is that you will go to college." And that was life changing.
Yeah.
I am forever grateful to this teacher. She did pass in 2016 from
Mm.
ovarian cancer, but I always feel like in life, when you're going through things, there's angels that come, and
Yeah.
she was one of them.
Yeah. God plants these people, like you said, angels in our lives. And sometimes, there's a saying that people are in your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime, right? And
And
she was in
because
your
of
life
her,
for a reason.
yes, and because of her, all of my siblings have gone to college.
Wow.
Um, and she made me believe that I could do anything.
Mm.
And, um, years later, after graduating college, I did get my master's. But going to college was not just, it didn't come easy. It wasn't just going to
Right.
college.
Right.
I was able to get a full ride into college because of my grades, because of my background, and because of all the help that she did. Um, my
It's
personal statement.
interesting. It's
Oh, go ahead.
interesting. Sorry to cut you off. Um, One thing I wanted to point out that you said that I'm still thinking about is that when she asked you if you were going to college, you were like, "Well, I'm too poor to go to college," and she was like, "Well, that's not a reason to go, not to go."
Yeah,
And I think for most people in this world, if they were in your situation or even anything close to it, and we often do this in life, is we assume that a current circumstance or something that's happened to us in life is keeping us or going to hold us back from being able to do something we want to do. And she didn't see that as a limitation.
no,
She knew something that you didn't know
yeah,
and didn't see that as a limitation or an excuse or a reason not to. And so I just want to point that out because, like you said, that was the catalyst of someone showing you that there was something that was possible that you didn't know, and she didn't believe that limitation,
yes,
and
that's true.
and was able to point you to the truth, is which was that you could go.
Yes, yeah.
So you get into college, you get accepted to college, full ride scholarship because you have exceptional grades, right?
Hmm.
And what your plan was to be a doctor. So what were you majoring in, like biology, chemistry? Like, do you remember?
So when I first started, I went into college as a biology major.
Okay.
Um, and I was really excited. My whole family was so excited. I was the first person to ever go to
Yeah.
college. I was the first person to be able to prove that we could go to college, even though we didn't have the money for it.
Hmm.
So it's a big step. And because just I feel like life just isn't always fair and it's always going to throw something else at you. Within 2 months of starting college, my full ride, I got very sick. And um,
In what
I
ways?
knew
You say
something
very
was
sick. Like what were you experiencing that was?
Yeah, I was having severe headaches. I was randomly fainting. I felt
Mm.
like I was losing sensation on part of my body, which was very random. And eventually, there was one morning, I'm never going to forget, October 2006. I woke up and I couldn't feel half my body.
Oh.
And I told my parents, I was like, I need to go to the hospital. Like something is wrong. And my parents took me to the hospital. I was still like, I went to San Diego State University. So from Oceanside, it was like a 45-minute commute. And my parents were like, yes, we're going to take you to the hospital and all this bunch of stuff. Granted, we didn't have insurance, so everything was always out of pocket. Um, so we go to the hospital and I'm there. They do all these studies and I knew something was wrong. Like I
Yeah.
just knew something was wrong. And I see my parents come in and they had this look and I could tell, I was like, it's not going to be good. And the doctor comes in and he was like, I have news for you. It's probably not what you want to hear today, but we have to talk about it. And he was like, you have a brain tumor. And I'm
Mm.
just like, I'm sorry. Like, no,
How old
no,
were
no.
you? 18?
I was 18. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
So I was like, I'm sorry. And I could see like my parents crying and I knew this was really big for them. And I'm just sitting there like, I'm sorry. Are you sure you have the right report? Like, are you sure
Right,
it's me? Like,
right,
are you sure I don't just need like a shot or, some vitamins or
right.
something? And I am
And
like in
IV
denial.
fluids.
I'm not like having brain fog. I'm not really listening, but I'm kind of listening. And he was like, no, this is you. And, they're showing me my studies. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm going to die. Like, there's no way I can afford medical treatment. There's no way I could go
Right.
through this. But, with everything, if you see a pattern in my life is that when I have these setbacks, especially, I always turn to God and
Mhm.
pray. And that's exactly what I did. I was like, God, I don't know why this is happening to me right now after I
Mhm.
worked so hard to get into college. I don't know what the purpose of this is,
Right.
but if you help me get through it, if you help me get through this challenge, I know that you have a bigger purpose for me.
Mm.
And it was hard. I remember the doctors writing a note that I had to bring to my school counselors that basically said I was going to have to decline my scholarship and drop out of college.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
so I sat there with my parents, and, the counselor is going through all these different options and stuff. And like halfway through, I was like, wait. I was like, wait, I am not going to drop out of college.
Mm.
And I just ripped the paper. I was like, I'm not signing this. I was like, I
Oh.
will figure it out. I was like, I may not be a straight A student. I may not be able to get the grades that I used to, but if this is my reality, I will die trying. I will die studying. I will
Wow.
die going to school. And that's exactly what I did. I
But where
ended
does
up
that come from though, Marley? Because you've been through really hard, difficult, tragic things in your life. And number one, even the fact that you can still talk to God, right? Because a lot of people by that point would have been pretty angry with God. If you're a believer and you believe in God and you are having all these bad things, one thing after another happen, and then you finally feel like you got on the other side of it. Like, I got into college, there's this hope for my future. And then 2 months later, you have a brain tumor.
yeah.
I just, I don't want to gloss over, like, most people wouldn't even have made it through their childhood, right? Without depression or addiction or suicidal thoughts or anything like that. And then now you get to this point where you have a brain tumor and you still aren't ready to give up. Like,
Yeah.
you're like, no, like, I'm not going to just drop out. Like, where does that come from? Because that's not something that I think a lot of people would be able to keep pushing through.
So I think that you bring up a good point, right? Like those suicidal thoughts and things like that. I wouldn't say that I never had them because I did. But when I thought about it, it was just like, I have two options. Like I could either end my life and that's it, or I can keep going and keep trying and keep believing and see if I could just make it better.
Okay.
And I think that when I looked at my 2 options, I was like, "Well, I don't wanna die."
Right.
Like, I don't wanna die.
Right.
And it's hard when, um, you don't wanna die, but moving forward is also very scary, but
Yeah.
it's also the only option that you have.
Mm.
And I just I just also felt like, you know, when you're meant to do something great, when you're meant to drive change and be an inspiration and share your story, I felt, one day maybe my story can help someone.
Mm.
And I just said, God, everything happens for a reason, and you're the only person that allows things to happen. So I always try to understand the lessons behind that.
Mhm.
I feel like the brain tumor really humbled me. I feel like the brain tumor helped me understand the medical system, and it helped me want to pursue a career in healthcare even more because I saw some of the gaps in healthcare, not just from an outsider looking in, but as a person that went through that system,
Right.
as a person that was young and didn't have the knowledge, didn't have the finances. And I don't know, I think my motto in life is always like, if you just keep going, you can't fail.
Mm. So when you are 18, you have a brain tumor. So what did your treatment look like? Did you have to have surgery? Were you on medication? Like, what was life
So
like with the brain tumor?
it was hard. Um, and I had, like I said, I had no insurance. Um,
How were you paying
so
for treatment?
my parents took me to Mexico. We
Oh.
lived we lived, like 45 minutes from the Mexican border.
Mhm.
There were doctors in Mexico. We could pay out of pocket an amount that was very affordable for my parents.
Oh.
I ended up working with an amazing physician who um, used a lot of natural medicine and radiation to treat it. It was not easy. It certainly was not from an emotional and physical standpoint.
Yeah.
Um, I missed a lot of school. I had good days and bad days. And I did become depressed at certain points. And I just remember my dad telling me, he's like, honey, pain is inevitable, but being miserable is optional. So
Mm.
you can either, let this get the best of you, or you could choose to be better every day. And
Wow.
his words just stuck with me. And every single time I was like, you know what, he's right. I am hurting, I am in pain, but I'm going to get up. And sometimes my goal was just, if I could just make it out of bed today, I'm going to be happy. And then it was like, if I can make it to class and just sit there, I'll be happy. And that's what I did. And, um, my GPA did suffer. I ended up graduating college with a 2.7 GPA.
Wow.
I was so hard on myself because I'm like, I went from being a 4.0 student
Mhm.
to a 2.7 GPA. And I felt like it was not fair, but I still did it. I still put myself through it. I still moved through all those challenges, and I have my degree, and it's probably one of my proudest degrees.
And you didn't give up. You kept going. You had this dream to be a doctor. That's probably part of what also kept motivating you to keep moving.
Yes.
And if just in case people don't know, once you get your bachelor's degree in biology or whatever you get in, and then you have to apply to
Right.
medical school.
Right.
It's not like a given, right? And
Right.
so
100%.
what happens then, right? You've graduated, you've made it through, you've survived a brain tumor, you've managed to still graduate even though you didn't have, perfect grades. You finished school, you didn't give up, you kept going. And so did you apply to medical school?
I did. I applied to 20 medical schools.
20.
And yes, and I was rejected from 20 medical schools.
Wow.
Yes. So that was
Wow.
hard. I think it was hard because the reason that I got rejected, it was not because I was lacking the skill sets. It was not because, you know, I didn't know what I was doing because I went to a few interviews. Everything was wonderful. On paper, I looked phenomenal. But when it came to my GPA, it felt like I was just a number. And when they looked at my GPA, I had so many people tell me, they're like, you don't have what it takes to be a doctor. You will
Wow.
never be a doctor. You should just give up. You should do this. And it was like
All
there
the
were so
things you
many
survived
people.
and all the things you've been through would make you an amazing doctor, would make you so compassionate and empathetic towards other people. But because of your GPA that
Yes,
you have, because you had a brain tumor,
right.
all 20 schools said no.
Yes, correct.
So how do you decide where to go from there?
Yeah, so I hit rock bottom at that point. That was my rock bottom. It was like, man, I worked so hard and I didn't choose to have a brain tumor, right? Like that's what
Right,
I
it's not
kept
something you
telling
did to yourself.
myself,
No.
right? So I'm like, if I did have a brain tumor, I could have had a 4.0. I could have done all these things. So there was a time where I was like very angry with myself, even though it was like, it's not my fault. But that was my lowest because this is everything I had worked towards.
Mhm.
And now I have no plan, right? This is what I had worked towards. And
Right.
now I have no plan. And I'm in my living room, my little college apartment that I was renting with a few other college roommates. And I call my dad, and my dad shows up. I'm on the floor crying with all my 20 letters, like just
Mhm.
crying. And I remember my dad was like, you know what, honey, sometimes God's rejection is a redirection for something greater.
Wow. He just keeps dropping these like
My
nuggets.
dad has like amazing life lessons, and I don't
Yeah.
know if it's because of everything we've gone through.
Yeah.
My dad's also a very spiritual person, and I
Yeah.
think that in our lowest moments, he's always just reiterated that spirituality, that trust in God.
Yeah.
So he told me that, he hugged me, and I was like, what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do? Like, literally. I had no plan. I couldn't even get into a post-bac program because of my GPA. So I was
Right.
like, my GPA is really
Like
screwing
I
it.
can't even get into any other program.
Exactly. So I was just like, I'm done. And at that time I was working for a medical scribe company. So, you
What is a
know,
medical scribe company? What does that mean?
yeah, so I was working for a medical scribe, and what medical scribes do is that they work alongside with physicians in different specialties and emergency rooms, and they transcribe the medical encounter. So when a doctor goes in to talk to a patient, they have a medical scribe who's standing right next to them. They're writing the medical note. They're making sure everything's captured, and then it creates basically their medical record.
Okay.
So I was working in an emergency room. I was doing that, and about a week after I got rejected, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, the CEO of the company called me, and she was like, "Hey, I heard you didn't get into medical school, and I have an opportunity for you."
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, well, I have nothing else going on with my life. So, I mean, sure. And she said, how would you like to be a traveling project manager and travel the country and implement medical scribe programs in different areas of the country? And I
Wow.
was like, that sounds incredible. I got nothing else going on. So there's nothing to lose. And, I took that job. And within a
How
month,
old were you at that time?
I was 22.
Okay.
Yeah, I was 22. And within a month, I was relocated to Naples, Florida.
Wow. Were you in
And
California still at that time?
yes, I had never left
Oh
California. I
gosh.
had never left home. This was like,
Wow.
we're
Couldn't be
buying you
farther
a
from where you
ticket.
live.
Yes. They're like, we're buying you a ticket.
Oh
You're
gosh.
going to move to Naples temporarily. You're going to live in a hotel, and you have to go set up this brand new program. You have to meet with the medical director, the CEO of the hospital. And I was like, okay.
You're 22 years old and
I'm
you're like,
22 years old.
here we go.
Here we go. So I left. It was very hard because I knew nothing outside of California up
Mhm.
until that point. But I was like, I have nothing else going for me. So this could either be a great idea or it could be a really bad idea that I'm going to learn something from. So I ended up leaving. I implemented that program in Naples, Florida. The time came, and then I was sent to New Orleans.
Mm.
And they're like, okay, we're going to send you here. And they told me, they're like, you're going to implement medical scribes in clinics. And I was like, clinics, but we only do emergency rooms. And they said, well, it's something that no one's been able to do, but we want to see if maybe you can do it.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, okay, that's a lot of pressure.
Well, it also means they had a really high belief in you.
Yes. And I'm sitting there like, I'm moving to New Orleans in 2 days.
And New
Okay, let me
Orleans is a
go.
world of its own.
Yes. And, it was such an amazing experience. I showed up, I knew nothing. And at that time, they're like, we're going to send a junior manager to work with you so that they can learn. I said, sure, no problem. Same thing. I showed up. I had a meeting with the CEO of the clinics. It was different specialties, different things. I sat there. I had no idea what they were talking about. I just sat there with my notebook, smiled. I was like, yes, we can do that.
Taking note.
Taking notes. And I remember the junior manager walking out. She was like, how did you know all that? I was like, oh, I don't. I have no idea. I was like, this is my homework. This is our homework.
Right.
Like, we're going to go home
We need to
to
go home
our
and figure it out.
little hotel room, and we're going to figure this out tonight because we have to
Wow.
present on it tomorrow. But also in my head, it was like, I can't fail because this is all I have. So
Yeah.
if I fail, I have no job.
High motivation to figure that out.
Yes. So it was a lot of hard work. And as a result, I ended up being the person that first pioneered medical scribes in outpatient clinics. And I
Wow.
was able to take that business and go from 0 scribes in the medical scribe industry to having scribes in 4,000 clinics across the country, Canada,
Wow.
and Australia.
Wow.
So I could say it came with a pretty big promotion.
Yeah.
I ended up training hundreds of managers across the country. I ended up developing the training and education for over 25,000 medical scribes today.
Wow.
And it was amazing. It was incredible. I was living my dream. I was sitting at board meetings with high executives. I was working with the CEO of our company very closely. I was working with the legal team. I was working with the CMS trying to create new legislation for medical scribes. And I'm very proud to say that from the other scribe companies that ever tried to implement medical scribes in clinics, they never did. But the medical scribe company that I worked for at that time continues to thrive based on that success.
It's really amazing. I mean, for you to go from, like you said, your lowest point of not getting accepted into medical school and feeling like there's no future for me, to you actually becoming a pioneer that changed the medical industry that wouldn't let you in.
Yes.
Like, you know what I'm saying? That like, no, you can't be a doctor. And you're like, oh, that's okay. Because now I'm going to be working alongside the doctors and the CEOs of the hospitals and the things like the clinics and stuff like that to implement something that helps doctors probably do their job better or more efficiently or easier. Right.
And it helps patients have better quality of care. So one
Right.
of the biggest roles that I played afterward was basically being that consultant to hospitals, whether it was Harvard, Johns Hopkins, UCSF. I mean, the big hospitals, I got to sit at their tables and consult and brainstorm and say like, hey, you can provide good quality of care while still getting a bigger return on investment by just making these changes. And I became that person. And what was interesting was that in that moment, I realized what God's redirection was. And I felt like becoming a physician and helping people, which is what I loved. And the reason why I wanted to go into medical school to become a doctor was to help people. I'm like, I feel like God felt that I was limiting myself because by being a physician, I would not have the reach that I was able to have going into the medical scribe industry.
Yeah. And who better to understand from the patient's point of view, because you've been through a major, illness or, problem with the brain tumor. You didn't have health insurance, right?
Yeah.
You had to find an alternative way to get treatment. Like all of the life experiences that happened to you that at the time felt devastating and awful. And why is this happening to me? And felt very low. Those things actually became part of probably what helped to make you so good at what you were doing.
Yes.
That and those wisdom bombs from your dad.
My dad, Yes, my dad always dropping his wisdom till this day.
Yeah.
If there's one person, even like my husband would know, like if I'm having a bad day, he's like, you need to call your dad. Like, it's
Mm.
like his message, go call your dad.
Yeah. That's so sweet. So how long did you stay there?
I ended up working for that company for 14 years.
Wow.
14 years, yes.
Wow. And during that time, I know you mentioned you did actually end up going back and getting your MBA. Did you do that while you were
Yes, I did.
doing time?
So in 2017, I started to get an itch for like the entrepreneurial world.
Mhm.
And I ended up finding a lot of joy from baking. I love to bake. It was something I did with my mom. And I decided to start a home bakery.
Hmm.
Pennsylvania had a law that, because I got married and moved to Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania has like a law where if you have like an inspection and follow like the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, you can set up your business and work from your home bakery.
Hmm.
So I was like, you know what? I can bake at night. I can do this. So I started setting up the bakery and it was great. And I was like, you know what? I know nothing about business. Like, what am I doing? But I also was like, getting excited about the business side because I had
Mhm.
done a lot of the operations, a lot of the hands-on with training and leadership. And I was like, you know, there's so much on the business side that if you could just put those two things together, you could do so much more. And I was also like, I also don't know what my future is going to look like or what my future is going to look like with this company or outside of this company. So I wanted to expand my knowledge, right? I fully believe that, you know, you should never stop learning. And I felt like I
Mhm.
had reached a point where I was like no longer really learning and I
Mhm.
wanted to challenge myself. So I don't know why I felt like having a newborn baby was the right time to go get my master's, but
Hmm.
I had a 2-year-old. I had just started my home bakery and I had just given birth to my baby,
Wow.
my second baby. And I told my husband, I was like, I'm going to apply to get my master's degree. And he was like, are you sure? I was like, yes. And
You
he's
don't
like,
already have enough to do?
yeah, and he was like, if this is what's gonna make you happy, then you can do it. But it was also like I felt like I had unfinished business
Mm.
because I didn't get to do what I wanted to do in college.
Mhm.
I didn't get to, and I used to tell my husband, I'm like, I feel like if my circumstances were different, I could have been that student. I could have been the 4.0 student.
Mm.
And now I feel like my whole life I was haunted by this GPA, this number, right? Like
Wow.
I became just a number. So I applied to the MBA program and I had a lot of fear. I was like, imposter syndrome, all this fear. I was like,
Mhm.
what if I don't get in? I don't have the GPA. And of course, I used to go into like this panic mode because I knew my GPA was really low and they always ask for that.
Mhm.
And I remember talking to like one of the admissions people. I was like, what are my chances? Like, I don't want to be rejected again. Like, what are my
Yeah.
chances? Like, my GPA is really holding me back. And he was like, just be honest. Like, just talk
Mhm.
about your experience and talk about the amazing work you're already doing. And you know what? If you can do that, your GPA is not even going to matter.
Wow.
So I remember going to the
Like, what a
interview.
different story than 14 years ago.
Yes, I remember going to the interview and I talked about the things that I did and why I wanted to continue learning. And I ended up getting accepted. I still couldn't believe it when I got the letter because it was the first time that I was accepted into something where my GPA didn't matter.
Yeah.
And I felt so accomplished.
Mm.
So I ended up doing that. I did that for 3 years while still working at the medical scribe company, while running my home bakery and being a mom. So it was a lot. I was,
Yeah.
it was not easy. I was going crazy. I was like waking up at 3 in the morning to study. I was going to bed late studying. I had support from my mom and my husband, like watching the kids on the weekends. I was like, okay, I'm going to do all my homework because it was a lot of work. But I was able to prove to myself that I was right. If my circumstances were different,
Mhm.
the outcome would be different.
Mhm.
And I ended up graduating with 3.8 GPA from
Wow.
my master's program.
Wow.
And I just felt so accomplished. I felt like my life came full circle. And I was like, thank you, God. Like, I understand. I
Yeah.
get it. And it meant so much more because I knew how hard it was
Mhm.
when I went through it the first time.
Yeah.
And since then, I did leave my medical scribe company. I made really great friends. I'm still really good friends with their former CEO and COO. And Those are relationships that I will always cherish. And the people that I got to work with, I catch up with them every once in a while. But I decided to do something about healthcare. And I started my own virtual healthcare company. So I co founded MedCompanion, which provides virtual med companions to patients during their medical appointments. And now I provide support not to the doctors, but to the patients themselves.
Yeah.
Because as someone who has gone through so much with her health,
Mhm.
I know how scary it is. And I
Mhm.
know how difficult it is. And I know how hard the system can be to do it alone. So I wanted to provide something that patients could feel supported, empowered, and less scary. And I knew I wanted to do this. I didn't have like the impulse to do it. It was always an idea.
Mm.
And then I got to go through it with my own grandmother. So in 2020, my grandma was diagnosed with cancer. And within 3 months, she passed.
Wow.
But in those 3 months, I got to see how my grandma, who is very independent, very on top of her health, get really lost in the system
Mm.
and get really confused about her medication treatment, her follow-up, her this. And when she passed, I like made my grandma a promise. I was like, Grandma, I am not going to let your memory and everything you went through go unnoticed. Like, I am going to make a difference. And
Wow.
that was my turning point. That was my calling where I was like, I'm going to start this company. I am going to do it. And
Mm.
I had no plan. When I left my company, I had no idea that this is what I was going to do because I left my company before I knew I wanted to do this. I just knew that I needed a change.
Mhm.
I didn't know what it was going to be. And my grandmother passing was like my sign.
Mm.
And I spent the last 2.5 years devoted to building this business. And I now, as a result, have like 4 other businesses that I also co founded with my business partner.
Wow. Wow. So, two things I want to circle back to that you said. One thing you said was, I just felt like if my circumstances had been different, I would have gotten the 4.8. I would have gotten better grades. I would have gotten a better GPA. Like, and I think if your circumstances had been different, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing today.
100%.
You
Yes.
would have gone on to be a doctor. You would
Yes.
have gone on to do what else, and so often in times in life, we get really disappointed by things that either are in our control that we made bad choices of and we're suffering the repercussions, or things that we had no control over. You didn't have control over getting a brain tumor. And we can feel like a victim of our circumstances and be like, if my circumstances were just different. And I think this is the part where if you believe in God, then you believe that I believe that we take the path that we think we should and that we desire. And if it's not what is intended for us, God finds some way to redirect us. And sometimes that redirection feels very painful
It is.
in the moment, and it's confusing and we don't understand it, and we're questioning God, and we're angry at people around us, and we can become very bitter. And I love that you went back later to prove that, like, I can get a higher GPA, but you didn't with that then go, now I can go to medical school, right?
Right.
Like, part of it was just proving that like you could do it. But if, but those circumstances had to happen the way that they did in order for you to be able to achieve what you're achieving today.
Yeah.
And the second thing I wanted to mention, with your grandmother passing so soon, I have a lot of people in my life around me right now that I love dearly, friends and other things, that are losing loved ones. Like, this year has been incredibly hard for a lot of people around me that have lost loved ones, and they, their pain with that, right? The confusion with that, questioning God of why they took them. And you were able to, when you lost your grandmother so quickly, 3 months
Yeah.
between a diagnosis and her passing, we're able to look at that and say, how do I take this and turn it into something good? How do I take this and learn from it? How do I take this and have a legacy or build on, or something that had to do with my grandmother? And I think it's just continuing to show your character and how you're wired and how you're thinking, that all of these hard, heavy things that have happened in your life, you didn't make it mean, well, I guess God hates me, or he doesn't love me, or I'm just destined to have a crappy life. Like, you didn't make it mean any of that. And by choosing, like you said, it was a choice. By choosing to look at your circumstances differently, by choosing to not give up, by choosing to just keep going every single day when it was hard, you are able to continue to produce something that's beautiful and helpful and making an impact in the world. And I think that's incredible.
Yes. And you're right. It comes with a lot of pain. And I would say, like, yeah, sometimes I would sometimes question God. I was like, God, why? Why again? Why am I here again?
Have I
You
not
know?
suffered enough? That's
Yes.
what I'd be asking, right? Like, have
Yeah.
I not suffered enough?
And, when I look back at everything and I look at the goals that I set for myself, like wanting to be a physician, um, I'm like, sometimes things happen to teach us a lesson, but also to show us that we're dreaming too small. And,
Mm, wow.
I felt like I had this dream of being a physician because I thought that was so wonderful and so great. And it
Big
is. I mean,
deal.
I married a physician, I see the work that he does. Um, but at the same time, for me and everything that I went through, I was like, I know my calling is higher. And I know that I now understand that the best thing that God did for me was reject me, was put me through
Mm,
that rejection and redirect the path that I needed to
right,
take.
right. Yeah. Well, he didn't reject you. He just
Right.
rejected the things you were trying to do. Yes.
Exactly. And now I was like, wow, I was really dreaming small. Like I
Yeah.
should have been dreaming bigger this whole time. And um yeah, I sometimes look back, and I recently had a friend ask me, she was like, you've gone through so much. If you were to start over, would you change anything in your life? And I said, no, I would go through every single thing that I went through again because it showed me a lot along the way. It brought a lot of growth. It brought a
Mhm.
lot of pain, but it also brought a lot of beauty. And now I get to share that with others. And now I get to see that the life that I was trying to build for myself is nowhere near the beautiful life that God felt I deserved.
Yeah. So, what does your dad think about all this? Is this like his wildest dream come true? Like, I can't imagine coming from Panama, suffering all the things that he did, being homeless, all the things, to now watching you're the oldest, you said, right? Of four children. Like, what does your dad think about all this? What is his life like today? I'm curious.
Yeah. So, my dad is a general contractor. He worked for a big construction company. And he's just, I think him and my mom sacrificed so much, and both of us were there along the way. And I know I didn't talk about my mom as much, but it was like mostly my dad's like wisdom, but my mom was always like my support.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say, like, now they look at us, and every time we talk to them, they're like, it was worth it. Everything
Mm,
was worth it. Like
mm,
everything that we went through is worth it, and it's beautiful. And they get so much pride. I went on to get my MBA. I have a background in public health. I'm a certified health education specialist, and my siblings are all college graduates. My brother ended up going to the University of Berkeley, where he graduated with
wow.
2 engineering degrees. My sister went to UC Riverside, where she graduated as a chemical engineer. And my
Wow.
younger brother went to the University of Delaware and then decided that college wasn't for him and he was going to go pursue a trade instead. And now
Mhm.
all three of them work for the construction company that my dad originally started at, and they now are running that company.
Wow. Wow.
So it
That's
does feel really
incredible.
cool. And my parents look at everything and they're like, you know what? It was worth it. It
Yeah.
was worth it. And I think that for us as like siblings and as people that went through all this, and when we look at our story now, yes, back then we used to cry about it and we could never imagine the
Mm-mm.
life that we have now. But we look back and we're like, thank you, God, because we now have gratitude. We now have appreciation. We now have all these things that we can value and appreciate and share with others.
The words that you just said, like, made me tear up, saying it's worth it. right? Because when you're going through the pain, you don't know the future. So you don't know that it's going to be worth it. All you can think about is your current circumstances and how hard they are and how much it hurts. And it's very difficult in those moments to say, this is going to be worth it someday, right? That's not things that we usually say to ourselves. But when you're able to look back now and say, when we were, there was times in my life I was living in a car. There's times in my life where I had a brain tumor. There's times in my life, all these things happened. And for you to be able to say it's worth it, I think is a message that people that are listening right now that are in those dark moments need to hear. Like,
Yeah.
It will be worth it.
It
You
will be
just
worth
have to keep going.
You have to keep going. You have to trust in God, and you have to believe in yourself too. And I felt like if there was anything that I learned from going through homelessness and brain tumor is that, people can take things away from you, right? Money comes and goes, but your knowledge, that's something nobody can take from you. What you learn, your skills, your thoughts, your innovation, those are things that no amount of money and no person in the world can take from you. So I work with other people and inspire them and do leadership development. And I'm like, you know what? If there's one message I can send, it's like, keep learning always. Because even if you end up in a situation where you fall at your lowest point, where you have no money, where you're homeless, where you don't know what to do, you will remember how to do it. You will be able to use those skill sets to get back up.
Yeah.
So even for me, sometimes people are like, "Aren't you afraid of failing?" I was like, "Dude, I've already been
there, done that.
Failing." But I also know that because I've been there, I know how to get out.
Yeah.
And I will do it again if I have to.
Yeah.
So I think to me, it's just like, you just got to keep going.
Yeah. So tell us what life looks like today. You have 2 children, or did you have more?
I have 2 children. I have a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl.
And so it's called MedCompanion.
MedCompanion, yes.
And so how long have you been running that business now for?
So we were running that business. We launched it in 2021, at the end of 2021. We ended up doing a beta phase. So we did a lot of testing with it and we trialed out our whole process. And earlier this year, we officially launched and tried out a few things again. We ended up like rebranding, we trademarked it, went through all the different hoops that you have to go through in business. And we're now relaunching with new branding. We have our whole like health coaching and specialist component that we're adding to it, just helping patients with new diagnoses, right? I remember how scary it was getting a brain tumor diagnosis and not knowing where to go, not knowing how to cope with that. So now we're trying to make sure that people like my grandmother who were diagnosed with cancer will know how to navigate that system.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty amazing. And then you said you have 4 other businesses that you co-founded. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So as a result of MedCompanion and I guess my passion for education, we have recently added MedCompanion University, which is going to launch in 2024. And that is going to be an accredited program to help train medical scribes and health coaches for other companies. Or if they want to come work for ours, that's great too. But we at least want to make sure that quality and that compassion and empathy is carried through some of our education. I also co-founded a private security company called Odyssey Protection Services. Part of that, again, I'm a big public health advocate. So part of that is just in seeing some of the increases in crime and security and concerns for that. My business partners and I wanted to make a difference in the security industry and provide quality security services. I got to work with several security companies. I got to see some of the gaps that were lacking in some of the quality of service. So we wanted to improve it.
Wow. So what's really cool that I'm noticing about you is you just have a ability to notice gaps, notice the needs of people. And you can't notice the needs of people if you don't have awareness of people, if you don't have empathy towards people, if you're not paying attention to people. And so I think that's also something beautiful about you, that you're noticing where people have a need and then you want to solve it. And you're creating businesses to solve those problems.
That is correct. And I think that, the reason I wanted to be a physician more than anything was because I love people. I wanted to help people. And I realized that being a doctor was not the only way to help people. So I've had the opportunity to work with amazing business partners to be able to co-found some of these businesses and bring them to fruition, and hopefully be able to make a difference and revolutionize some of the standards that are currently out there.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that, this is a new podcast and we're only a couple episodes in, but this is the first episode where I have ended with such a smile on my face and a good feeling inside of me from such a devastating place. You know what I'm saying? Like, every guest we have on this show has been through these horrible, devastating things that then turned into something great. But just hearing about the fact that you just never gave up and just kept going, and seeing what has come from that today just makes me so happy and excited for you and everybody who's going to get to experience everything that you're creating. It's really quite remarkable.
Thank you. It's been so wonderful to be here. Like I said, this isn't a story that I've shared before publicly, so it's the first time I share it openly and publicly. As you could tell, I still tear up talking about it. But I also told myself, I was like, I wish I could have heard a story like this when I was going through it, and just known that it does get better.
Yeah.
So I took ownership, and I felt like I took my power back when I decided to talk about it, to share my story, and hopefully be a light of hope in someone's life right now.
Yeah. Well, I think that 100% is absolutely going to happen. So I'm just blown away by you, Marly. I'm so honored to have you here. Thank you for sharing your story with us. This is a story that needs to be told, and I hope that you'll continue to tell it. And hopefully someday you'll write a book.
I always told my parents, I'm like, if I ever get out of this, I will one day write a book. So that is actually on my vision board, to one day write a book about it. I haven't started. I haven't really put much thought into it, but it is on my vision board to one day.
I have no doubt that you will do it. So if our guests want to know more about the businesses that you have, or more about you, where can we send them to find out more?
Yeah, so if they want to know about MedCompanion, which is probably like my pride and joy, I would say they can go to www.medcompanion.com, or they can always email me at Marly, MARLY _ Brodsky, BRODSKY at medcompanion.com.
Great. And we'll put the links to those in our show notes as well, to make it easy for people to get in touch with you. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Marly, thank you so much for being here today. It was an honor to talk to you and hear your story, and very excited for you.
Adrienne, thank you so much for inviting me and letting me have an open space to share my story for the first time.
Today's story was a remarkable testament to human resilience, courage, and perseverance. I encourage you to carry their lessons with you to use as an opportunity to grow, evolve, and strengthen your resolve. As a special gift for my listeners, I've put together a free guide called The Resilience Playbook. If you've ever felt stuck or powerless, I'm sharing 10 resilience factors to give you hope, inspiration, and empowerment. Get yours free today and start turning your setbacks into comebacks. Go to theresiliencefactorpodcast.com /playbook to get your copy today, or click the link in the show notes. You can do hard things, my friend. Strength lies within you, just waiting to be unveiled. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and most importantly, stay resilient.